So we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about changing culture. As you can see from the list of organizations, we do a lot of work in traditional settings, pharmaceuticals, building cars, whatever. We do some in healthcare. We do some in the military. But my point of reference is really that. So take that for what it is. But what I find interesting is some of the stuff that happens in healthcare is the same thing as making automobiles or making ho-hos or nuclear submarines. I mean, I'm serious. It's the same principles. And a lot of it has to do with opening things up, like I said, fixing the system first. And the only quibble, sorry, Terry, the only little small quibble I'm going to have with this presentation earlier is that statement at the end, by reason, I think, talking about not changing the human condition. And I don't want to get all preachy or anything, but we're going to talk a little bit, we may, just a little, talk about behavior and changing behavior and changing how we see things, how we operate, and sort of kind of getting out of that mentality. Some people have this notion of 20 years ago, we didn't do this, that, or the other. And it's like they're hanging on to it, man. It's like, it's been 20 years. Move on, evolve. But we get stuck in these old ways of thinking, and it doesn't do us any good, And a lot of times, people may suffer, people may get hurt, because we're reluctant to turn the page, to look to the future, to move ahead. And part of that's going to be the notion of looking out for each other a little bit more, talking a little bit more often about safety issues and other issues, opening things up. The idea of near-miss reporting he was talking about is great. Some people are afraid to report a near-miss, and I'm doing a breakout too, or a couple of them later. And we'll go through all these systems, but I'll try not to make it boring. But the systems are really important, and that's why I like his emphasis on that. And some companies reward people. You actually get money or little safety trinkets or other things if you report near misses. The thinking, like he said, is you got a whole bunch of those near misses before something goes wrong. If you chip away at those near misses on the front end, the chance of something bad happening goes way down. So we'll talk about that as we go. So let me just go through a couple considerations and this idea of culture. And we're going to do an exercise. I heard the expression the other day, death by PowerPoint. We're going to try to avoid that. We've got an hour here. I'm going to try to keep things moving and have some fun as we go. Part of that's going to be doing some exercises. I want y'all to think about it because we're going to get into like groups of 3 or 4. And the first exercise is going to be, how do we make culture better? What are the key aspects of a good safety culture? Where people aren't getting hurt, where patients aren't getting hurt, where we're doing things the right way, where we're not just slapping procedures on that. Because I'm telling you what, that's not unique to healthcare. Something goes wrong with blanket policy, all of a sudden you got a policy for everybody. It's not unique to you all. So anyway, we're going to do that here in just a second. Let me go through a couple of big picture ideas first before we get to this exercise. In terms of an ideal safety culture, spending money, spending resources is obviously key. Safety is not compromised when determining scheduling and staffing, and that may be a big issue for y'all. You may be shorthanded. That whole idea of we're doing less with more, whatever that progression was y'all outlined, is real. Excessive overtime, by the way, is a big issue. People don't appreciate how well you operate or don't operate when you're tired. Let me just tell you real quickly about a study that was done on the effects of excessive overtime on performance. All right, so basically, in this experiment, you had people come in like y'all did this morning, and instead of having a little peppermint thing and a pad of paper and a pen, you had a box of Legos. And the idea was you've got half an hour, build as many Legos as you can in that half hour, and then we'll see what happens. But it was broken down by a group. So like the first, let's say 4 or 5 tables, y'all would be group 1. So y'all come in, you're the normal group. Come in, here's your box, build as many cards as you can, and then we add up the total number. The second table, right by that light, all of y'all back here, you all were kept up to be like excessive overtime. So I don't know how many hours they did it, but they were trying to mirror the effects, So you all come in and you're extremely tired, get the same box, build as many cards as you can. The rest of the room, all y'all in here, you all had a wet bar. Now it wasn't, 11:25 or whatever. It was later in the day. But basically, there was a bar. And the idea was y'all hang out and drink whatever you want. Red wine, Jack Daniels, whatever floats your boat. And this group hung out and basically just drank and hang out until they were double the legal limit. And they had breathalyzers and everything. And once they got to double the legal limit, they said, all right, here's your box. Build as many cars as you can. So you got the regular group, you got the tired group, and you got the drunk group. What do you think happened in that little study? Who did the best? No. You might have. I kind of set it up. There were no statistically significant differences. Group 1 was way better than everybody. But there were no statistically significant differences between Group 2 and Group 3, between the tired group and the drunk group. It's just y'all had a lot more fun, you know. Guys were building like lowrider cars and stuff. But, you know, think about that for a second. It's scary. And again, my frame of reference in a traditional type of, making widgets or whatever, I'm thinking about guys getting hurt out there. A guy, in an energy company in Tennessee working 47 straight days during outages. The guy is spent. And we're doing a safety culture assessment, which is kind of part of what we do, and part of it is interviews. And I'm talking to this guy, and he's just like dead man walking. I mean, the guy is fried. And I'm feeling bad for him. I'm like, dude, you need a nap and a hug. You don't need to be talking to me. But, if something happens and he gets hurt, then what happens? Like, Terry was saying something about root cause. He doesn't like that term. I don't either. And that's what companies do oftentimes. I don't know if you all do the same, where you do some kind of root cause, and then you do some kind of corrective action. And I just know it's going to be operator error for that. Because in industry, this is how it happens. Somebody gets hurt, they do a root cause, and it's always operator error. It's like, I don't know how it is, the system, there's a computer and everything, it always goes operator error. Corrective action, retraining. And then you cross that off the list and move on. Here's an extreme example, I'll make it quick. But a guy in a traditional plant is walking along, and there was a situation where someone didn't depressurize a valve. I won't get into all the details, but basically there was an explosion. And the way this plant worked, they had lines actually painted on the floor. So like depending on if you're lab or maintenance or operations, you walk on certain colors of the paint. So you're walking along, red line, green line, blue line, whatever. So this guy is walking along, boom, there's an explosion. This object, like a manhole cover, if you can picture that, flipping end over end, 30, 40 feet, whatever it was, boom, hits him in the back of the head, knocks him down. It could have killed him. If it had hit him flush, it might have. But it knocked him down. He had stitches, woozy, whatever else. They do an incident investigation. What was their root cause? Yeah, the guy was walking on the wrong line. You're supposed to be on the green line, And it's like a contributing factor. Oh, by the way, metal object, hurtling through space. But seriously, that is the mentality. That's the way people think. It's how they operate. It's just like it just happens that way. So when we're talking about determining schedules and determining systems and trying to look at the big picture, again, look at the system first before we start blaming people. And we'll get to that here in a minute. Continuing along with our list, senior managers spend time talking one-on-one with employees about safety. If there's 2 or 3 takeaways from this, and I'm on all kinds of I got a sinus infection, so sorry, I have to get soda here a bunch, but if there's 1 or 2 takeaways, I hope this is one of them. MBWA, management by walking around. And the more we can spend time out there talking to people, understanding what they're dealing with, the better off we're going to be, regardless of environment. I don't care if it's hospital, army, I don't care, whatever the environment. That principle to me is applicable everywhere. Management by walking around, spending time talking to people about what's going on. Supervisors aren't pushing production sometimes. Praise needs to be more common. We'll talk about that here in a second as well. In terms of discussions, and this is the part where we get into the human condition, we can't change it. And again, maybe I'm taking that out of context of what the guy meant. But to me, one of the biggest mistakes we make is we don't talk to each other. And in hospital settings, my understanding from the brief work that I've done is there's some hierarchies there, and I may not tell a surgeon X, Y, and Z. I may not feel like I may not be comfortable enough. And correct me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe that's not the case for you all. But there may be some barriers there as to why we don't always speak up if something doesn't look right to us or doesn't feel right. Or an occasional thank you, nice job, attaboy, I appreciate it. More praise is a good thing too. It works. It's not some kumbaya, rainbows and unicorns, fluffy thing. It's science, and it works. If you want to get people doing certain things, praise them for doing it. They're more likely to keep on doing it. We get praised for production, for getting things knocked out. The gentleman's comment a second ago, we get paid to do stuff, right. And if I'm doing good stuff for safety, and you notice it, a little thank you now and again, put safety back somewhere where I can see it. Because I see it, I don't know if y'all have this, I see it all the time. Safety is our number one priority. Safety first, safety first. Man, baloney. Man, safety's like third or fourth on a good day. And if you start getting behind schedule, all of a sudden it starts dropping in a lot of places. So if you really want safety at the forefront, it needs to be something we're talking about all the time. We need to be praising it more often. Here's an example. I saw a sign, by the way, real quick, and it was at one of these smelting factories that are just nasty. If you've ever been in one, you know what I'm talking about. It's nasty, nasty work, nasty environment, nasty attitudes. And there was a sign that said, safety is our number one priority. And it was all rusted out and grungy and dirty, I'm like, man, that's been there for 100 years, man. Change that sign. It's just embarrassing. But discussing these things, opening things up. So in my breakouts, too, like I said, I'll talk more about some of the systems, too, because I do believe fix the system first. But we're going to talk about the human element as well. So think about this. So here, let's do our exercise. And let's just break, if you don't mind, into teams of 3 or 4. I just want to throw out some general ideas to get us thinking. To me, ideal safety culture, fixing issues right away, getting back to people if they've got concerns, thanking people for reporting near misses instead of, making them do 6 hours of paperwork. Those are all aspects of a good culture. Policies. I'll just say one last thing, and then we'll do the break. Here's an example of what I was saying earlier about slapping policies on stuff, because when it was said 2 or 3 times, it makes me laugh because industries do the exact same thing. Example, guy in a bearing factory. It's a building 50 times as big as this room, and all they do is build these little bearings. That's all they do. This guy cuts his head open, and in this plant, you got to wear hard hats. Well, the guy had a baseball cap on. A lot of them had baseball caps. He cuts his head open pretty bad. They do an incident investigation, and they determine, they ask him, why didn't you have your hard hat on? And his response was, I thought I did. I had his ball cap on, and, maybe he's lying or maybe not. I mean, it's possible. Anyway, the plant manager is in this meeting, and so when the guy says, it was my baseball cap, I thought it was my hard hat, he goes on the PA system, says, attention all employees, effective immediately, baseball caps are no longer allowed in the building. You've got 20 minutes to return all baseball caps to your vehicles, blah, 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 blah. And people are like, what the heck's going on? So they did, because they outlawed baseball caps after this one injury. What do you think these guys were wearing the next day when they came into work on the job? What did you say? Cowboy hats, yeah. Cowboy hats. One guy had a 10-gallon cowboy hat. It's a real, old school cowboy hat. They had, one guy had a sombrero. He was in Tijuana, like with little tassels. It was authentic. They had everything. Dr. Seuss hats, you name it. It was their way of saying, man, this isn't right. And he was smart enough to say, all right, maybe I overreacted here. But it happens all of the time. And then you got, like you said, you got some procedure, some policy in some notebook on some, shelf. Meanwhile, the defibrillator is green instead of red. I'm hitting the wrong dang button. Really, it's like, where is our mind at with this stuff? So ideal safety cultures, engineer out problems on the front end as best you can, communicate with people, ask questions, MBWA, management by walking around, all that. So that's a very long answer to your short question of how do we start? Where do we start trying to make things better? Well, that's a start, trying to make, and you can assess it. Do cultural surveys, assessments, and find out what you're good at, find out what you're bad at, and try to get better. That to me is step one. Anyway, let's do our exercise. So if you would please, like I said, groups of 3 or 4 people, think about and talk about from your experiences, what are the key aspects of a good, ideal safety culture? Think about it, talk about it, jot down some ideas. We'll report out in just a minute. Any questions? Let's go ahead and report out and see what y'all came up with. Just to make sure, the microphone's working okay back there? Y'all hear me in the back, all right? Just a quick word of the wise, not to be crude or anything, but if you ever find yourself up on one of these stages with one of these on or a lavalier mic and you take a break and go to the restroom, make sure this thing is turned off. I'm just telling you, trust me. Ideal safety culture. What did y'all come up with? What's important? Communication. Well, good. Thank you, and thank you. Communication's key. And doing it in an open fashion, do it in a respectful fashion. Let's say I'm a surgeon. I'm the best in the world at whatever surgery I'm doing. I should have the open mind to say, I appreciate feedback from other people. Even if I don't always agree with it, I appreciate the fact somebody's trying to help out now and again with a safety issue or another issue. Sometimes we get this attitude because of my specialty or because of my 36 years of experience that I'm not listening to you. I'm in here 35 years. Who are you to tell me how to do my job? And again, that's where problems happen because you don't speak up. And when you don't speak up, real quickly, if you look on the internet, there's something called I Chose to Look the Other Way. It's a real good story about a guy on the job who saw a younger kid doing something real dangerous and didn't speak up, and the kid ends up getting killed. And he kind of goes through the emotions of it. He wrote a poem, and he's not to be all dramatic here, but he's living with the guilt of it. Then he wrote this thing called I Chose to Look the Other Way. So again, my point being that communication's big, and it should be open, and we should appreciate it. That's a good one. What else? Sorry, I didn't hear that. And, okay, don't get mad. I just asked. Okay. Whew, I'm having a date. I'm coming up on my 10th marriage, and that just felt all too familiar. My 10th year. 10th year of marriage. Not my 10th marriage. Is that a Freudian slip? I have to think about that one later. Yeah, 10-year anniversary. Thank you. Yeah, I forgot. I don't even know what to say about empowerment. Yeah. We're actually going to talk about empowerment in a second. Because years ago, I'm telling you, 10 years ago, you couldn't walk 10 feet without hearing empowerment. Empowerment. I mean, it was everywhere. And I like the idea of empowerment. We actually got it on a graph here. The idea of going from dependent, do what you're told, mentality, real hierarchy, military-based, based on your position, do what you're told. If you're a nurse here versus that there, there's a hierarchy. Follow it. You know what I mean? And then the thinking was empowerment. And think for yourself. And that's important. Just because it's not my job title or job description necessarily. If I need to get involved, I get involved. If the whole Boston bombings the other day, I kept hearing this phrase, and I'm glad it's at least out there, the phrase, if you see it, you own it. If something doesn't look right, you get involved. And that's part of the empowerment piece of it. And trying to have the system set up, to Terry's point earlier, where it's appreciated instead of, like I said, some cultures aren't like that. Interdependence is where we want to be. And that is looking out for each other. And it's not just me speaking up. It's me getting involved, looking out for other people, expecting them to look out for me. That whole pay it forward kind of thinking and mentality. I agree with the empowerment. I'd say it's also taken it to the next level of looking out for everybody else. Abraham Maslow, hierarchy of needs, self-actualization, if that sounds familiar to anybody, right before he died, he went from self-actualization as being the highest state of consciousness, where you have your act together, to self-transcendence, where you're looking out for other people, you're doing acts for other people. So, good answer, thank you. And for safety, that may just be something as simple as, I appreciate it if you'd, wear this PPE, or let me give you a hand transferring this patient into a wheelchair, or something along those lines. What else? Okay, walking the talk. When I do training with hourly employees, that whole thing about if I had $1 for every time, I would be in Tijuana somewhere having a cocktail or, I don't know, something good. Because I hear it all of the time. I hear it all the time. Walk the talk. And it's usually employees saying managers need to walk the talk. We're talking about safety. The truth is, when it comes down to it, you don't listen to me. Or it's only about this, or it's only about that. So that's a big one. Thank you. What else? And that's the whole system thing. Again, on the front end, I feel like I'm a broken record. But what are you measuring? We had a discussion this morning. I couldn't contribute a lot to it. It was about, finances and well-being and really important topics. My frame of reference is just pretty much the safety side, and cost as a function of not getting sued or cost as a function of workers' comp claims and things along those lines. But to me, on the front end with safety, it's How many near misses are we getting? More is good. Reporting minor injuries may not be a bad thing. You know, I go in and I remember one of these assessments I went in and asked, do employees report minor injuries? And the guy's like, no. Why do you think we can never find the first aid kit? And it was basically his way of saying, if you can't find the first aid kit, it tells you something. People don't report that stuff. Either they don't want all the paperwork that goes along with it, or they don't want to get in trouble. So again, proactive stuff is checklist. We'll talk about that in the breakout if you're interested. Maybe a proactive thing. Incident reporting, near-miss reporting, fixing stuff right away. I think it's nice to see a list of things that we've done as a result of employee suggestions. You may have a formal process to get employee suggestions. If you never respond to it, people aren't going to use it. You know what I mean? But if I'm getting a list of 61 things, the organization, the hospital, or the whatever did to try to address these concerns, my motivation is much higher. My attitude's a lot better. As Ian was saying before with attitudes, I may go from a resistor to adapter, even to a believer, because I'm seeing good things happen, and it's being advertised. What else did y'all list? Sorry, you threw your voice. I didn't know where I was going. Okay, good. And that collaboration, again, part of that is communication, being open. You know, Terry was saying before about organizational psychologists. He had a list up there. Basically, what we do is two things. It deals with hiring the right people and then training them up and getting them, as he said, to work collaboratively. So that may be a culture change for you all if you're not used to doing it that way. But again, we'll talk more as we go along here. And the whole last section, I want to make sure we get to it, is on communication skills. I think part of it is how do we get across to somebody else without irritating them? Because sometimes I get a little irritated, you know, indignant about someone trying to tell me how to do my job. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. Anything else in terms of an ideal safety culture before we move forward? Okay, transparency, 100% agreement. Minimize paperwork when it comes to reporting some of these things is a big one too. What else? Good. And then maybe, you know, it's not my job, that's your job. That's a safety person's job. That's somebody else's job. It's not my job. And sometimes we take that too far for whatever reason. A lot of times I think it's bad attitudes. Anything else? You know what? Whoever said that, I agree with. Even if it isn't the best idea. One guy said this. They had a problem with heat. He said, we need to build a dome over the entire facility, like Jerry Jones did for the Cowboys. Dumb idea, sorry. But from that dumb idea, they decided to do water breaks. They got a bunch of fans brought in. They had Gatorade. They did a lot of good things because of this one suggestion. So we need to, and the worst thing we can do is a non-response. You know what I mean? I may not get my response back I'm looking for, but if I don't hear back at all, what do you tell me? I'll take the time. Something's bothering me, safety issue or otherwise. Get it all out there, drop it off, and I never hear back. What's my impression of what's going on? Right, they don't care. And it may not be true. It may be a dumb idea. But at least get back to me and say, sorry, bud, we're not building a dome, but we'll do, you know, A, B, C, D, and E in the meantime to try to help you. You know what I mean? So I agree with that. Anything else? Yeah, in the previous slide, the previous presentation was situational awareness. And again, that's easier said than done because like you said, we go on autopilot. It's tough. And I've been doing this job. The longer I do it, you know, I have more expertise. And you can't buy experience. However, that can go the other way. You know, by the way, where people get hurt, at least in traditional work settings, the first 6 months or 20-plus years. It's like an inverted U, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times, I've been doing this for 30 years, never got hurt. It's a tough sell to get me to change. And I don't see it. That's why I appreciated the questions that y'all had for these guys earlier about hazard awareness. And that's where checklists come into play sometimes. That's where that idea of looking out for each other comes into play. Because I'm on autopilot, I don't see it, but you might. That's where being open-minded, again, I feel like I'm getting all preachy, soapboxy here, I don't mean to. But if I'm open-minded and you're newer than me, or you're from a different area, and you come in with an idea, I need to listen, you know what I mean? Because you're seeing things differently. Because sometimes we just don't see those hazards. I'll give you one quick example, and then we'll wrap this up. But sometimes we're not aware, and sometimes information is not communicated well. My wife had a tumor the size, like this big. I'm not exaggerating. It's in medical journals. They've done all this research on it. And for months, speaking of being married 10 times or 10 years, I was telling her, suck it up. Honey, come on, honey, suck it up. Come on, I mean, you know. My response was, I didn't realize she had a tumor bigger than a softball in her abdomen. Oops. So anyway, I'm still paying for that. I'll pay for that forever. But anyway, so they're taking this big tumor out. And actually, the doctor came in. He was like sweating, man. Like he was just, I mean, sweat. They didn't expect it to be that big when they got in there. So anyway, he had to like muscle this thing out. She's in recovery. And so she's there. I'm there, of course. I'm sleeping there and whatever. Well, I go out to the restroom. And when I come back in, there's a nurse in there. And she's explaining to my wife, who's already half out of it, about the morphine thing. There's like a morphine, and well, at least at this hospital, there's a drip, and there's a button, and it's a blue button. And when the blue button goes on, you can hit the button and distribute morphine. Well, she's explaining it to my wife. And I come in on the tail end of this conversation, and I get, when that blue light comes on, hit the button. That's what I heard. And I swear to God, I think she told me that. I maintain she did. My wife did, but I think the nurse did. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, I'm watching the thing like a hawk, man. I'm nervous. Like, as soon as it goes on, man, I got to hit the button. So the light will come on, boom, I'm hitting it. You know, I was afraid to get up, you know. Well, you know, I don't know how many minutes later, but all of a sudden she can't breathe. You know, they're like, we've got a problem. I'm like, I was hitting the button. You're like, yeah, you went through a bag and a half of morphine or whatever. So that communication piece is big. That one I got in trouble for too. But sometimes those things happen. And that's where we get into this notion of behavior. And that's where I kind of extend out maybe a bit from the earlier presentation on the system, because I admit I am 100% fix the system. But behavior matters. We have choice over our own actions. It's not determined. We choose how we do things. And we choose to get involved and help out other people, or we don't. Now, this is the National Safety Council, says 90% of all injuries are due in part to at-risk behaviors. I'm going to repeat that to clarify, because I don't want people to say, well, this guy came in from Virginia and said if somebody gets hurt, 90% chance it's their fault. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is when things go wrong, there is almost always a behavioral component. And a behavior is just something you could observe. If I took this clicker and wanted to see if I could hit the exit sign, I don't know why I would do that, but if I did, that's a behavior. You can observe it. You might infer something, you know, mentally about me, but the behavior, you can observe it. A behavior is just what you're doing. It's an action. You can see it. Most injuries have a behavioral component. There are risky behaviors associated with the injury. And again, that's not to blame the person, but we got to be aware of it. Because I think it's higher. I think it's almost 100%. I've seen very few cases where maybe spider bites and stuff like that. You got to get extreme. There's almost always risky behaviors. So in terms of an ideal culture, step one is the environment, always will be. Fix the environment. Have good schedules, hire enough people in the first place, spend a little more money to get the right people. Some companies, you all probably don't have this, but some companies, you know, job interview, pass a drug test. Okay, you're in, you know. You need a little more. And the more you spend time hiring the right people in the first place, the better off you're going to be. I'd rather have a whole lot of real good people to begin with than try to train up, you know, a bunch of people kind of on the edge. So the environment is always step one. Fixing stuff, scheduling stuff, manpower stuff, defibrillators. I cannot believe there's a little protection thing on a projector and not a defibrillator. That blows my mind, man. But again, that's an environmental thing. Get the right dang defibrillators. I ask the companies to do it. It's shocking. The person side matters too. You know, I like what Ian was saying about resistors, adapters, and believers, and he said it was 33% for each one. Whew, I've been in some companies that they would pay good money to get that distribution. I mean, cavemen is the term I've heard. Co-workers against virtually everything. And if you have caveman mentalities out there, you're in trouble. Y'all know it. You get one bad attitude, all of a sudden you got 10 bad attitudes. It's like it spreads, man, like a virus. One company, actually, I'll make it quick, they had a thing where they actually got money, and they had to pay taxes on it, and they were mad. Some people refused $100. I'm not making this up, because they didn't want to pay 40-something% in taxes for it. They were mad, literally. So that's part of it too. But the behavior side is what we're going to focus on. And when we're talking about behaviors, again, you got to look at the system factors behind it. That was covered really well earlier, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. But again, fix the equipment, fix the schedules, the culture itself. All these factors are behind the risky behaviors that we're taking. So we don't want to blame people. Here's a real quick study I want to talk about. From our survey, it asked, do you get involved and help out other people? Should you do it? Almost 100% of people on the survey say yes. You should tell somebody if they're being risky. Next question, are you willing to speak up? 85%, yep, I'm willing to. When the question is, do you actually say something, it drops down to 60%. So you got almost 100% of people saying you should tell somebody when they're being risky, just over half actually doing it. My question to you all before we move forward is, why? Why don't we get involved and speak up when we feel like it, when we want to? What's holding us back? Okay. If I got shut down in the past, I'm less likely to speak up the next time. Sure. Other reasons? Okay, inappropriate responses. That might be a real tactful way of saying something a lot worse. Yeah. And I'm tired of non-tactful responses. I got enough stress in my life already. I don't need any more. And if I had a bad experience last time, I'm anticipating a conflict, I'm not going to say anything. Or maybe it's not my job, or I'm tired, I just don't want to get involved. For whatever reason, that to me is a behavioral barrier to an ideal safety culture. The discussion of preventing errors, and I like the idea of preventing harm, but preventing bad things from happening starts with, in many cases, speaking up and having a culture that not only accepts it, they appreciate it. Instead of those other ones, and there's a bunch of them out there where it's just the opposite. You do your job, I do my job, don't tell me what to do. So we're trying to open things up. Behavioral safety, we'll talk about in the concurrent session, is part of that too. But I want to talk real quickly. What was Domino's slogan years ago? Or it's free. I was dead broke in college. I had a recliner that was tilted. It was cockeyed. And we would watch TV with a little TV on cinder blocks. I had some roommates. We had an egg timer. I don't know how. We didn't have anything in that. There was a total disaster dump. And we were broke. We used to drink Jobel beer. It's actually Goebbels. I don't know if y'all have heard of it down here. It's a northern thing. But it's terrible. We call it Jobel to make it sound better. It was terrible. And it was like, I'm serious. I don't know if they still make it, but it was like $5 a case for bottles, you know. I'm serious. I'm not kidding. And it was still a ripoff. I mean, that was still overpriced. It was terrible. We used to call Domino's Pizza and drink Jobel beer, and we would wait and see. So as soon as we made the call to Domino's, yeah, we'd like a large pepperoni pizza, hang up, boom, go. And it was like a football game. We're drinking beer 20 minutes, 10 minutes to go, you know, and it worked. One out of every maybe 7 or 8 times, they'd be late, and we were like ambushed. Who has a free pizza documented? You know, we're all. But from a company whose job it is to sell us pizza, that was pretty darn smart. Whoever came up with it, they may have stopped it because I bet they got sued, is my guess. But think about it. Now, I live in a college town, so I see it all the time, especially with phones now and texting. It's just crazy. Kids cannot drive. So you got that age group, generally speaking, delivering pizza, and they're already bad drivers, and then you tell them to get all these pizzas out in X amount of time? You know, where's the blame when something goes wrong, when you do the incident analysis or whatever? Look at the system first, especially with time pressure. Time pressure, production pressure, whatever term you want to use is one of the main drivers as to why we're taking shortcuts out there. Part of it, too, is human nature, which we'll talk about momentarily. So got a guy here, why do we take risks? Lack of accountability, ergonomic design, time schedule. But I want to talk about the human nature side for just a second. And activators, behaviors, consequences. Behaviors, patient transfer, hand washing, storing of medications, verbal communication with patients and their idiot husbands is a behavior. Those are all behaviors. Activators get our attention. Consequences motivate what we're doing. So just think about this from this behavioral psychology 101. We've got a guy here fishing. Any of y'all like to fish, by the way? Please raise your hand if you like fishing. How come? I think it's boring. I'm going to shake things up. Boring. It's relaxing? Not for me. I never catch anything. I get all irritated. I can't do it. Get frustrated. Is that any other reason why y'all like fishing? Just curious. Go drinking? Okay. Well, I got a recliner in the sports center, but there we go. Drink your Jobels. All right. Now I'm starting to warm up a little. Any other reasons? There we go. There's an, okay, now, yeah, okay. I wasn't. I was fishing for this answer because I got a little stock comeback, and that is, I had a guy say, man, it's about outsmarting the fish. And my response was, you should raise your expectations. It's a fish, man. But, you know, people get into it. And passion and things that get you fired up, that's all good. And we got a guy here that's doing it. You don't have to catch a bunch of fish. People do it because they want to, because it's fun. They get they get inspired. By the way, a real good movie, A River Runs Through It, is a great movie. Fly fishing, I tried. That's hard. That's really hard. They make it look easy. I won't get into the details. That's a good movie. But anyway, we do it for a reason. He's fishing because it's fun. He likes doing it. There's natural consequences. How about here? So he's having a good time. Who's having a better time here? You know? And that's the problem. Now, I understand the guy's overdoing it on the right. Somewhere in between is probably where we want to be. But the point of that is our natural inclination is to be risky because it's easier, it's faster, and it's more comfortable. So going on Ian's comment and Terry's comment too, I believe, I think Ian said, I know Terry did, about what is our answer? Well, just don't make mistakes. Man, we are mistake-making machines. I mean, you know, we are designed to do things as fast and easy as possible. And if we get away with it and I don't get in trouble, and I don't get hurt, woo, bonus. That's right, man. That's how we operate, especially if you're a type A personality. Because time pressure is the biggest issue, I think. And it could be imposed from the company, the organization, the hospital, whatever, or it could be internal. Do you remember the type A, type B personalities real quick? Do y'all remember that from years ago? The type A is like the hard driving, get it done. Type Bs are kind of the laid back, go with the flow, Bob Marley, whatever, different mentality. The type A's, this is particularly important for you all, and you can go online and take those tests. Type in type A, type B, take the test, it'll tell you. Here's a quicker test. Go to the supermarket. If you get in the wrong line and you're looking around getting all irritated because other lines are moving faster, that's type A. And I'm not making this up. I had a guy say, well, what if you start counting in the 20 items or less lane how many things they got? I'm like, that's an A squared, you know what I mean? So you got all kinds of stuff. You got system stuff, you got personality stuff, you got human behavior stuff, all encouraging us to be risky. The question is, how do we motivate? How do we turn it around? And again, I've talked about cultural assessments is a good way to kind of see what you're good at and not good at and try to get better. Behavioral safety with checklists, I'll talk about in one of those sessions, may or not be applicable, but part of it too is management practices. And I want to talk about that real quickly. I know we're getting low on time. I want to make sure we have time for a couple questions. At least I'll try to. Name famous psychologists for $100. Ian, since he's the coordinator, director here, said he's going to give you $100 for every correct answer. Name famous psychologists for $100. Freud. Very interesting. Very innovative. He had some other problems. I won't get into them, but they're bad. Anyway, so Freud's a good answer. Easy answer. $100. Nice job. Who else? Skinner, Pavlov. It was a good group. I usually get Dr. Phil right out of the gates. That's good. Pavlov and Skinner, I'll pay you for that. Thank you. Good Lord. That was two good answers. Anybody else? Carl Jung, he and Freud were contemporaries. Freud got a little weird about it, not surprisingly, and broke things off. Jung was a good one. You guys are good. How about this? There was a guy at Yale University named Stanley Milgram, and he did these shock studies. Have you all ever heard of this? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about, these shock studies. So he would bring these people in. So Ian and Rick, is that right? So Rick and Ian come in. Rick, you don't know this, but me and Ian are working together. And Ian's an actor. You don't know it. These guys come in. They draw straws. Ian is hooked up to this chair with all these electrodes. And I tell Rick, look, Rick, as part of this scientific knowledge, blah, 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 he's in another room hooked up to this electric chair. When he makes a mistake on this test he's doing, you got to shock him. All right? And that's what I tell him. And I tell him we're trying to improve the educational system and blah, 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 blah. The truth is, will he hit the button? That's the question, right? Perfect stranger. 40 people in the original study. How many of them you think hit the button? 39. One colonel walked out. The rest did. And it escalates. And they start amping it up. All right, phase 2, now it's a moderate level. Phase 3, and it goes up and up and up, and I forgot the overall numbers, but it's scary. Because, again, Ian's an actor. He's screaming and hollering in the other room like he's getting shocked. And these poor people were having breakdowns and crying and biting their nails. And yet, what was their behavior? Zapping them. And that tells us a lot. Now, what is the takeaway from that? You're right. It's not that something's wrong with Rick. If he's smiling, like, that's a problem. But it's not Rick. It's the fact that human nature is we do what we're told. Someone in a position of power, so that means all of you in positions of power, formally or informally, have a lot of influence over what's going on around you. And if we're not careful, this is how we screw things up. We don't praise the good stuff for safety. It just goes unnoticed. We talk about safety, but I see someone clean up a spill they didn't do. We're doing a real good job getting help with someone, with a patient, trying to lift them into a bed or a wheelchair or whatever. A little thank you now and again goes a long way. We almost never do it because we don't see it, we don't notice it, we don't think we have time for whatever reason. Or it's a waste of time. I'm not getting paid for that. So that's why we don't always praise the good stuff. Or we don't coach the risky stuff. This is where we get in trouble because I don't want that bad conversation. I don't want getting chewed out. I don't want someone chewing me out or however you said, in a non-tactful way telling me to go take a hike. It may be, it's not that big a deal, or we've always done it this way for whatever reason, especially if I'm in a position of power or authority and I don't speak up, it's basically saying, what? Right, it's all right, go ahead. It's sort of like an agreement between us. Or we focus on just production, time pressure, and scheduling, and hitting the schedule, and making the schedule. Part of that is having schedules that make sense in the first place. Give people a break. Have schedules that make sense, but also making sure that we're not that pressure and the time pressure doesn't trump safety and taking the time to do whatever I'm doing the right way. Or modeling risky behaviors. I'm being risky myself as a leader. Like in this, here, again, traditional work environment, but you got people walking through without PPE on, hearing protection, safety glasses. If I'm her, I'm irritated. I got to wear all this stuff I don't like wearing in the first place. And they come breezing through. When they're not around, I'm more likely to be risky myself just because I don't like doing it. So here's an example of modeling. Got a dog here with a problem. Guy sees the problem, decides to model the correct behavior. Dog sees the behavior. And there you go. We got to be careful out there. We got to be careful when it comes down to modeling the right behaviors for safety. So real quick from a time perspective, I got about 5 or 10 minutes. Ian, where time-wise, where are we at? 7 minutes. All right, let's talk about communication. There are different styles of communication. I'm going to breeze through this a little quick. Sheriff, diplomat, investigator. But pay attention, even if I go a little quick, because I want you all, in a moment, to rate yourself. I'm putting you all on the spot. Real quick show of hands. If you work with somebody at your organization and they're sitting in the room with you, please raise your hand. Oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to do a little rating here. So pay attention. We have different styles of communication. Now, there's not just one and only one style, and this is part of this is just to have some fun as we go. Avoid the whole death by PowerPoint thing. But sheriff, diplomat, investigator, different ways of looking at communication. If you're a sheriff, you're real direct, big picture oriented, get it done, knock it out. And that's reflected in how you talk. The downside, those are all good things. You know where you stand with the sheriff. The problem is sometimes they're too direct, or maybe not too direct, but they're too aggressive. They may be running people over, trying to get their point across. They can be combative, insensitive, domineering. That's the downside to the sheriff. That's the good and the bad. Diplomats are totally different. They're easygoing. Some people they're approachable. They're easy to talk to. That's the diplomat. They're more laid back. They're more worried about collaboration and that team environment you were talking about earlier, about we're working together in teams. For diplomats, that's easy. That comes naturally. They don't have to work at it. And their communication reflects that. The downside is sometimes they get a little too wishy-washy or a little too soft, like the kitty before it had the gun there, being too soft. Or maybe it's just saying they're not direct enough. They're not upfront enough. You don't always know where you stand with the diplomat. I'll put it that way. With the sheriff, good or bad, you know. Diplomats, not always. They avoid confrontation. They may withhold their feelings because they don't want to hurt yours. okay? So that's the downside there. And then we have the investigators. On the positive side, they're accurate, well-prepared, detail-oriented, thorough, systematic, etc. However, sometimes they lose the forest for the trees, right? They just lose the big picture. They get overly rigid. Here's an example. In our company, I keep mentioning this survey for some reason, but we have a survey. 99 items is too many items. I took it upon myself last year to chop that survey down to something more reasonable for people to take. 6 months later, we're having discussions, I'm not making this up, literally long discussions about whether to use the term at risk or unsafe. And it's like, this is really not how I want to spend my life. You know, we got it narrowed down to 92. We got down to 92 after 6 months, and I'm like, fine, I'm done. I fought my fight there. But the reason is you got a bunch of investigators with degrees and whatnot in there fighting tooth and nail over every little point, when in fact, if you take a step back, it's not that big a deal. So my point with the investigator is, on the good and the bad, they are focused on the details. The good thing is they don't just fly off the handle. Like in meetings and stuff, they don't just get all impulsive and emotional and blah, whatever. They think first. So you've got a list here. If you can see up here, I hope you can, sheriff, diplomat, investigator, real quickly. And we're going to wrap this up real quickly. I want you to write down, on a scale of 1 to 10, actually just circle the one that fits you best most of the time, if you've got it in your book, or make a mental note. And pick one, don't pick two. If you have a tiebreaker, make sure it's one. Are you a sheriff, are you a diplomat, or are you an investigator? It's a 30-second exercise. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Raise your hand, please, if you are a sheriff most of the time. Raise your hand if you are a diplomat most of the time. This is not Florida. You get one vote here, people. I just said you get one. Investigator, raise your hand. All right. Well, raise your hand if you had trouble picking just one, because that's a fair point. Okay, good. That probably means you're more flexible, you're more fluid. That's a good thing. We need to be more flexible in our styles. We need to appreciate styles different than our own. Just real quickly, raise your hand if you saw somebody else raise their hand incorrectly. Okay. All right, because of time, I want to make sure I'm going to do 2 more slides, and then we'll wrap it up. But here's some considerations. When we're trying to give corrective feedback, one-on-one generally works better. Showing concern for people's well-being instead of that's the rules, or there's some comment written in some SOP on some shelf somewhere. It's because I don't want to see bad things happen. And when we're receiving feedback, appreciate it, take it for what it is. But again, if you're asking me for a quick summary of key aspects of good communication, ask a lot of questions, acknowledge people's experience and skill, thank people when they're coming up talking to you, and try to listen as good as you can, reflect back what they're saying. So sorry for the shortage of time there. We'll talk more about some of this stuff in the breakout session anyway.